It was supposed to be the happiest day of Karim Al-Mansouri's life. His wife was finally giving birth to the twins they'd tried for years to conceive. But when the ambulance screeched to a halt outside Lagos General Hospital during the worst storm Nigeria had seen in decades, everything went wrong. The power was out, the generators failing, and his wife was bleeding. In that moment of absolute desperation, a young nurse with gentle hands and determined eyes stepped forward from the chaos and said 5 words that would haunt him forever. "I won't let them die." What Karim discovered about this nurse's past would shatter everything he thought he knew about heroism, sacrifice, and the true meaning of wealth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain hammered against the windows of the private jet as it descended through the turbulent clouds above Lagos, Nigeria. Karim Al-Mansouri gripped his wife's hand, watching her face contort with another contraction. They had been en route to London for the birth, the finest private hospital, the world's best neonatal specialists, everything money could buy. But nature had other plans. "We can't make it to London." The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom, barely audible. "Over the storm. We need to land now." Yasmin Al-Mansouri, pale and trembling, squeezed her husband's hand. "The babies are coming, Karim. They're coming now." At 32 weeks, the twins were premature. Every minute mattered. Karim, who had built a telecommunications empire across the Middle East and controlled boardrooms with the flick of his wrist, felt completely powerless. His wealth, his connections, his carefully laid plans, none of it mattered now. The jet touched down at Lagos Airport with a violent jolt. Through the small window, Karim could see the city in chaos. Streetlights flickered and died, trees bent nearly horizontal in the wind. The storm had knocked out power across half the city, turning the bustling metropolis into a maze of darkness. "Sir, the ambulance is here," his personal assistant Ahmed said, rain already soaking through his expensive suit as he opened the cabin door. The transfer to the ambulance was a nightmare. Yasmin cried out as they lifted her stretcher, her labor intensifying with each passing moment. The ambulance raced through flooded streets, weaving between abandoned cars and fallen debris. The driver, shouting over the storm, explained that their intended destination, the elite Lagoon Hospital, had been evacuated due to flooding. "Where are we going then?" Karim demanded, his voice tight with panic. "Lagos General," the driver replied. "It's the only major hospital still operating." Karim's heart sank. He'd heard of Lagos General, a government hospital, understaffed and overwhelmed. This wasn't part of the plan. His children, his precious twins, weren't supposed to be born in a place like this. The ambulance pulled up to a building that looked more like a war zone than a hospital. The emergency entrance was packed with people seeking shelter from the storm. Injured, sick, and desperate faces filled every corner. The backup generators were running but barely. The lights flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows across the chaos. As they wheeled Yasmin through the doors, a harried-looking doctor approached. "I'm Dr. Okafor," he said, his voice strained. "We're going to take good care of your wife, but I need you to know our NICU is at capacity, and with the power situation—" He didn't need to finish. Karim understood. This was exactly the scenario he'd spent millions trying to avoid. They rushed Yasmin into the delivery room, but within minutes everything went wrong. Her blood pressure spiked dangerously high. The fetal monitors showed the babies were in distress. The backup generator powdered, the lights flickered and went out completely. In the sudden darkness, panic filled the room. Karim heard his wife scream, heard the medical staff scrambling for emergency lights. His world was collapsing. Then, through the chaos, came a calm voice. "Turn on your phone flashlights and point them here. Dr. Okafor, I need you to focus on..." "The mother, I'll handle the babies." A young woman had appeared beside the delivery table. In the dim light of the phone flashlights, Karim could see she was small, maybe in her late 20s, wearing scrubs that had seen better days. Her name. Tag read Amara Okonkwo, RN, but there was something in her eyes, a steady confidence that cut through the panic like a blade. "Who are you?" Dr. Okafor asked, sweat beading on his forehead. "Neonatal nurse," she replied simply, already scrubbing her hands with bottled water from her bag. "I was off duty, but I heard the commotion." Yasmin let out another agonized cry. The first baby was coming, whether they were ready or not. What happened next would replay in Karim's mind for years to come. As the lights continued to flicker and the storm raged outside, this nurse, this stranger, took control of the situation with a skill and composure that defied her humble appearance. The first twin, a boy, was born not breathing. In the inconsistent light, Karim watched Amara work on his son with steady hands, clearing his airway, beginning CPR with a precision that spoke of countless hours of practice. 30 seconds that felt like 30 years passed before the tiny cry filled the room. "He's breathing," she announced, but there was no celebration in her voice. "Second baby is coming." The second twin, a girl, was even smaller, even more fragile. Born 3 minutes later, she was blue and completely silent. Amara immediately began the same life-saving routine, but this time the baby didn't respond as quickly. "Come on, little one," Amara whispered, continuing CPR on the tiny chest. Her voice was so soft that Karim almost didn't hear her add, "You're stronger than you think. I know you are." It was in that moment, watching this stranger fight for his daughter's life with everything she had, that Karim noticed something that would haunt him. On Amara's wrist, barely visible in the dim light, was a scar. Not just any scar, but a distinctive mark that looked like it had been made by a rope or wire. It was the kind of scar that told a story of suffering. The baby girl finally drew her first breath, weak but steady. Both twins were alive but barely. They would need intensive care, specialized equipment, round-the-clock monitoring. All things that Lagos General, in its current state, could barely provide. "We need to get them to the NICU immediately," Dr. Okafor said, but Amara was already shaking her head. "The NICU is full, and half the equipment is down due to the power issues," she replied. "But there's a private room on the 4th floor that has a functioning generator backup. It's usually reserved for situations like this." She looked directly at Karim for the first time since entering the room. Her eyes were deep brown, filled with an intelligence and compassion that seemed to see right through him. "Your babies are fighters," she said, "but they're going to need constant care for the next 48 hours. The storm isn't supposed to break until tomorrow night." "What are you suggesting?" Karim asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I stay with them," Amara replied without hesitation. "I monitor them personally. I have the training and—" She paused, glancing at the twins. "I won't leave them." There was something in the way she said those last words that made Karim's chest tighten. It wasn't just professional duty speaking. There was something personal, something deeper. "You would do that?" Yasmin whispered from the delivery table, tears streaming down her face. Amara nodded. "It's what I do." But it was more than that, and Karim sensed it. As they moved the twins to the makeshift NICU in the private room, he watched Amara work. She moved with a grace and efficiency that spoke of experience far beyond her years. Every touch was gentle, every decision was precise. She spoke to the babies in soft tones, as if they could understand her promises that everything would be okay. The room was small and cramped, with only basic equipment, but Amara transformed it into something that felt safe. She positioned the incubators perfectly, adjusted every setting with meticulous care, and settled into a chair between them where she could monitor both babies simultaneously. "Get some rest," she told Karim and Yasmin. I'll call you if anything changes. You're going to stay awake all night? Karim asked. Amara looked at him with those deep, knowing eyes. Sleep is a luxury babies like these can't afford. As Karim left the room to find accommodation for himself and Yasmin, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this nurse than met the eye. The scar on her wrist, the way she spoke to the babies, the absolute certainty in her voice when she promised to stay. It all pointed to a story he didn't yet understand. He'd built his fortune by reading people, by understanding what motivated them. But Amara Okonkwo was a mystery. She'd appeared in his darkest moment like an angel, but there was something in her past, something that had shaped her into the person who could make impossible promises and keep them. What Karim didn't know was that Amara's story was about to intersect with his in ways that would challenge everything he believed about privilege, sacrifice, and the true meaning of saving a life. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside that small room, two premature babies slept peacefully under the watchful eye of a woman whose own story of survival would soon change everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dawn broke grey and overcast, the storm having finally exhausted itself just as the first shift change began at Lagos General Hospital. Karim hadn't slept. He'd spent the night pacing the hospital corridors, checking his phone obsessively for any word from Amara, and trying to process how his perfectly planned life had spiraled into chaos in less than 12 hours. When he finally returned to the makeshift NICU on the 4th floor, he found a scene that stopped him in his tracks. Amara was exactly where he'd left her, seated between the two incubators, but she wasn't alone. 3 other nurses had quietly joined her throughout the night, creating an impromptu support team around his children. "Mr. Al-Mansouri," Amara said, softly, looking up as he entered. Her eyes were tired but alert. "They had a good night. Breathing is stable. Heart rates are strong." Karim approached the incubators, his throat tight with emotion. His son and daughter looked so impossibly small, their tiny chests rising and falling with mechanical precision. Wires and tubes connected them to monitors that beeped reassuringly, but it was clear that without constant attention, those reassuring sounds could change to alarms in an instant. "You stayed awake all night," he observed, noticing the empty coffee cups scattered around Amara's chair. "Someone had to," she replied simply. "Premature twins often have synchronized episodes. If one goes into distress, the other usually follows within minutes. You can't monitor them separately." It was then that Karim noticed something else. Scattered around Amara's workstation were textbooks, advanced neonatal care manuals that looked well-worn and heavily annotated. These weren't standard nursing texts, they were graduate-level medical references that most doctors would find challenging. "Where did you study?" he asked, genuinely curious. Amara's hands stilled for just a moment as she adjusted one of the monitors. "University of Lagos," she said. But that was a long time ago. There was something in her tone that suggested the conversation was closed. But Karim's business instincts told him there was more to uncover. He'd built his empire by understanding people, and everything about Amara Okonkwo suggested hidden depths. "These books," he gestured to the advanced texts, "they're not typical nursing materials." "Knowledge doesn't respect job titles," Amara replied, her focus returning to the monitors. "When you're responsible for lives this fragile, you learn everything you can." Just then, an alarm sounded from his daughter's incubator. Amara was on her feet instantly, her movements precise and controlled. She adjusted the ventilator settings, checked the IV lines, and within 30 seconds, the alarm stopped. But Karim had seen something that made his blood run cold. For just a moment, when the alarm first sounded, he'd seen pure terror flash across Amara's face. Not professional concern, but something deeper, more personal. "Has this happened before?" he asked. "It's normal," she assured him, but her hands were trembling slightly as she returned to her chair. "Premature babies often have breathing irregularities. The important thing is responding quickly." Over the next few hours, as the hospital slowly returned to normal operations, Karim began to piece together a picture of Amara that didn't quite make sense. Doctors deferred to her judgment. Senior nurses sought her opinion. Even Dr. Okafor, who clearly outranked her, listened carefully when she spoke. "She's remarkable," Dr. Okafor told Karim during a brief consultation in the hallway. "In 5 years here, I've never seen anyone with her instincts for neonatal care. She seems to know what babies need before they know it themselves." "Then why? Is she just a nurse?" Karim asked. "Clearly she has the knowledge to be a doctor." Dr. Okafor's expression grew complicated. "Some people's paths aren't as straightforward as others, Mr. Al-Mansouri. Amara has her reasons for being where she is." By noon, Yasmin was feeling strong enough to visit the babies. Karim watched his wife's face transform as she saw their children for the first time since birth. The fear and exhaustion of the previous night gave way to overwhelming love and gratitude. "They're beautiful," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "So small, but so perfect." Amara smiled, the first genuine smile Karim had seen from her. "They have your husband's determination and your gentleness. That's a powerful combination." "How can you tell?" Yasmin asked. "Your son hasn't stopped fighting since the moment he was born. Even unconscious, he grips whatever he can reach. And your daughter." Amara gestured to the smaller twin. "She responds to voices. When you spoke just now, her heart rate became calmer. She recognizes you." It was then that Karim's assistant, Ahmed, arrived with news that would complicate everything. "Sir," Ahmed said quietly, pulling Karim aside, "I've been in contact with the London hospital. They can arrange emergency transport as soon as the weather clears completely. A specialized medical jet with full NICU capabilities." Karim looked back at his children, then at Amara, who was showing Yasmin how to touch the babies through the incubator ports. "When would that be?" "They estimate 6 hours. The jet could be here by evening. It should have been a relief." The London hospital represented everything Karim had originally wanted for his children. World-class facilities, cutting-edge technology, the absolute best care money could buy. But something held him back. "What do you think?" he asked Dr. Okafor later. "Medically speaking, would it be better to transport them to London?" Dr. Okafor considered the question carefully. "The London hospital has superior equipment, there's no question, but transport itself carries risks, especially for babies this premature. And honestly," he glanced toward Amara, "I'm not sure they'd receive more dedicated care anywhere else." That afternoon, Karim made a decision that surprised even himself. He called off the London transport. When he told Amara, her reaction was unexpected. Instead of relief or gratitude, she looked almost panicked. "Mr. Al-Mansouri, I need to be honest with you," she said, her voice urgent. This isn't my official assignment. I'm supposed to be working in the general ward. If administration finds out I've been here without authorization, then we make it official," Karim replied. "I'll speak to the hospital director. I'll hire you as a private nurse." Amara shook her head. "You don't understand. My situation here is complicated. There are people who would prefer I keep a low profile." Before Karim could ask what she meant, his phone rang. The caller ID showed his brother's name, Nabil Al-Mansouri, who managed the family's business interests in Africa. "Karim, I heard about the babies." Nabil's voice was concerned but controlled. Are you all right? Do you need me to arrange anything? We're managing, Karim replied, stepping away from the incubators. Actually, there's something else. I need you to look into someone for me. A nurse here at Lagos General, Amara Okonkwo. There was a pause on the other end. What kind of background check are we talking about? Everything. Education, employment history, family background. Something doesn't add up about her. After ending the call, Karim returned to find Amara in quiet conversation with one of the other nurses. The conversation stopped abruptly when they saw him approach. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "Fine," Amara replied, but there was tension in her voice. "I was just explaining some of the care protocols to Nurse Adana here. She'll be taking over the evening shift. You're leaving? I need to go home, shower, change clothes, but I'll be back tonight." As she gathered her personal belongings, Karim noticed something fall from her bag, a small, worn photograph. He picked it up to hand it back to her, but what he saw made him freeze. The photograph showed two premature babies in incubators connected to the same type of equipment that surrounded his own children. But these babies looked even smaller, more fragile. Written on the back in faded ink were two names, Kemi and Tayo. 6 months. "Your children?" he asked softly, handing the photo back. Amara's face went pale. She took the photograph with hands that were visibly shaking. "No," she said quietly. "Not mine." But the way she looked at the photo, the way her fingers traced the faded edges, told a different story. These babies had meant everything to her. "Amara, I'll be back at 8 o'clock, she said, cutting him off. "Make sure they don't adjust the ventilator settings on your daughter. She needs exactly 40% oxygen concentration, nothing higher." She left without another word, but Karim stood there holding pieces of a puzzle that was becoming more complex. By the hour, the scar on her wrist, the advanced medical knowledge, the way she'd appeared during the storm as if sent by fate, and now this photograph of babies who clearly weren't hers, but whom she'd obviously loved. That evening, when Amara returned as promised, Karim was waiting with questions. But before he could ask them, his phone buzzed with a text from Nabil. "Found some interesting information about your nurse. We need to talk. This is bigger than you think." As Amara settled back into her chair between the incubators, speaking softly to his sleeping children, Karim realized that the woman who had saved his babies' lives was carrying secrets that went far deeper than he'd imagined. And tomorrow, those secrets would begin to surface in ways that would change everything he thought he knew about heroism, loss, and the price of survival. The call from Nabil came at 6 a.m., 3 days after the twins' birth. Karim had finally managed to get a few hours of sleep in the hospital's family suite when his phone buzzed insistently. Outside the window, Lagos was waking up under clear skies, the first truly sunny morning since the storm. "Karim, we need to meet," Nabil's voice was. "Urgent, strained, not over the phone. I'm at the Echo Hotel, room 1247, come alone." 20 minutes later, Karim sat across from his brother in an opulent hotel suite that felt jarring after days in the hospital's sterile environment. Nabil had spread documents across the coffee table, official papers, newspaper clippings, and what looked like medical records. "Tell me about this nurse first," Nabil said without preamble. "How much do you really know about her?" "Enough to trust her with my children's lives," Karim replied defensively. "She's been incredible, Nabil. I've never seen anyone so dedicated." Nabil picked up a newspaper clipping dated 18 months earlier. The headline read, "Prominent Lagos doctor dies in car accident. Investigation ongoing." Below, it was a photograph of a man in his 50s wearing a white coat, standing next to medical equipment. "Dr. Emmanuel Okonkwo," Nabil said, "one of Nigeria's leading neonatologists, ran the premier private children's hospital in Victoria Island, worth an estimated $15 million at the time of his death. Karim studied the photograph, a growing unease settling in his stomach. Okonkwo. That's Amara's last name. Her father. Nabil pulled out another document. Dr. Okonkwo had 3 children. His eldest son, David, is studying medicine at Oxford. His youngest daughter, Grace, is in her final year at an elite boarding school in Switzerland. And then there's Amara. Nabil handed Karim what appeared to be a university transcript. The name at the top read, Dr. Amara Okonkwo, and the degrees listed made Karim's heart race. Doctor of Medicine, graduated summa cum laude from the University of Lagos. Specialized residency in neonatal perinatal medicine, completed at Lagos University Teaching Hospital. She's not a nurse, Karim whispered, staring at the papers. She's a doctor, a specialist. One of the youngest board-certified neonatologists in West Africa, Nabil confirmed. And according to these records, she was supposed to take over her father's practice. The Okonkwo Children's Hospital was preparing to name her as Chief Medical Director. Karim's mind raced back to the past 3 days. Amara's incredible knowledge, the way other medical staff deferred to her judgment, her ability to handle complex medical situations with ease. It all made sense now, but it also raised 1,000 new questions. So what happened? He asked. Why is she working as a nurse at a government hospital? Nabil's expression grew grave. He pulled out a police report, the pages yellowed and stamped with official seals. 6 months before Dr. Okonkwo's death, there was an incident at the Children's Hospital. Twin babies, born at 28 weeks gestation, were brought in during the night. The parents couldn't afford the treatment, but Dr. Okonkwo ordered his staff to provide full care anyway. Karim thought of the photograph that had fallen from Amara's bag. Kemi and Tayo. You know about them? I saw a photograph. She said they weren't hers, but... Karim paused, remembering the pain in Amara's eyes. She loved them. Nabil nodded grimly. The twins were doing well under Amara's care. She was the lead doctor on their case, spending 18-hour days with them. But their father, a man named Chukwu Okoli, had borrowed money from dangerous people to try to pay for the initial treatment. When he couldn't repay the loan, those people came to the hospital. The hotel room felt cold, despite the warm morning sun streaming through the windows. Karim sensed the story was about to take a dark turn. They demanded the babies be discharged. Immediately, Nabil continued, said the family could no longer afford treatment. Dr. Okonkwo refused. Amara refused. The babies were barely 4 months old, still needed intensive monitoring. Nabil handed Karim a hospital incident report. The clinical language couldn't disguise the horror of what had happened next. 3 men entered the NICU at 2 a.m. Amara was on duty, alone with the night nurse. They said they were taking the babies. When Amara tried to stop them, Nabil pointed to a line in the report that made Karim's blood run cold. Dr. Amara Okonkwo sustained injuries to both wrists from wire restraints. Babies Kemi and Tayo Okoli were removed from life support equipment and taken from the hospital. Karim thought of the scar on Amara's wrist, the one he'd noticed during that first chaotic night. They tied her up. She fought them, Nabil said quietly. According to the night nurse's statement, Amara literally threw herself between those men and the babies. They had to restrain her to get to the incubators. And the babies, Nabil's silence was answer enough. After a moment, he handed Karim one final document, 2 death certificates dated 3 days after the babies were taken from the hospital. Kemi died first, within hours of being removed from the ventilator. Tayo lasted 2 days longer, but without proper care. Nabil shook his head. Amara blamed herself. She testified at the inquest, but the men were never found. The investigation went nowhere. Karim stared at the death certificates, understanding now why Amara had looked terrified when his daughter's monitor alarmed. She wasn't just a doctor treating patients. She was someone who had watched helplessly as children died because she couldn't protect them. "There's more," Nabil said. After the twins died, Amara had what the reports call a complete psychological breakdown. She was hospitalized for 3 weeks. When she was discharged, she'd lost 30 pounds and refused to practice medicine. That's when she became a nurse. She took a job at Lagos General under her maiden name, Amara Okafor. She told the administration she was a registered nurse with a bachelor's degree. No one checked her credentials too closely. Government hospitals are always understaffed. Nabil gathered the papers into a neat pile. Her father tried everything to get her back into medicine, therapy, medications, even arranged for her to work at hospitals abroad, where no one would know her history. But she refused. She said she'd failed as a doctor, that she wasn't qualified to make life-and-death decisions anymore. And then her father died? Car accident on the Lagos-Ibadan expressway. Some people think it wasn't an accident, that the same people who came for the twins were sending a message. Dr. Okonkwo had been asking too many questions, pushing too hard for justice. Karim felt sick. So Amara lost everything: her career, her father, her sense of self. According to the inheritance records, she also lost the hospital. Her father's will left everything in trust until she completed psychiatric treatment and returned to medicine. When she refused, the estate went into legal limbo. Last I heard, the hospital was sold to pay debts, and Amara received nothing. The weight of revelation settled on Karim like a physical burden. The woman who had saved his children, who had worked tirelessly for 3 days to keep them alive, was someone who had been destroyed by her inability to save 2 other babies. She wasn't just qualified to care for premature twins. She was arguably overqualified, but she was also carrying trauma that ran deeper than he'd imagined. "Why are you telling me this?" Karim asked. "Because you need to understand what you're dealing with," Nabil replied. "This woman isn't just some exceptional nurse who happened to be in the right place at the right time. She's someone running from her past, hiding from who she really is. And based on what I'm seeing in these files, she's been living in poverty for the past 1.5 years, taking whatever nursing shifts she can get." Karim stood and walked to the window, looking out over Lagos. Somewhere out there, Amara was probably getting ready for another shift, preparing to spend another day caring for his children, while hiding the fact that she was more qualified than most of the doctors in the hospital. "There's something else," Nabil said softly. "I spoke to some contacts at Lagos General. Amara's position there isn't secure. She's been working on temporary contracts, no benefits, barely enough to cover rent on a 1-room apartment in Mushin. The only reason she's still employed is because she's willing to work double shifts for half the pay of permanent staff. She's been living in poverty while caring for my children? More than that, she's been using her own money to buy specialized supplies that the hospital can't afford. Those advanced monitors you've seen, some of the medications, she's been paying for them herself." Karim felt something break open in his chest. For 3 days, he'd been wondering who Amara really was. Now he knew, and the truth was more devastating than anything he could have imagined. "I need to see her," he said. "Karim, be careful how you handle this. If she finds out you've been investigating her background—" "She saved my children's lives," Karim interrupted, "while carrying trauma that would have broken most people, while living in poverty because she believes she's not worthy of her real profession, and I've been sitting here wondering if I can trust her." As he headed toward the door, Nabil called out one last piece of information that stopped him cold. The twins, Kemi and Tayo, their graves are in Ikoyi Cemetery. According to the groundskeeper, someone brings fresh flowers every week, always the same person, always alone, always a young woman who stays for hours. Karim understood. Amara hadn't just failed to save those babies in her mind. She'd adopted their memory, carrying their loss as a permanent reminder of what she saw as her greatest failure. But what she didn't realize, what Karim was only beginning to understand, was that her story of loss was about to become a story of redemption. And his twins, the babies she was pouring her heart into saving, were about to become the key to healing wounds that had been festering for over a year. Karim returned to Lagos General with his mind racing and his heart heavy. The elevator ride to the fourth floor felt endless as he processed everything Nabil had revealed. When the doors opened, he could hear soft humming coming from the makeshift NICU, a gentle, melodic sound that seemed to wrap around the medical equipment like a protective cocoon. He found Amara exactly where he expected, seated between the incubators, but this time she was doing something that made him pause in the doorway. She was reading aloud from a children's book, her voice soft and rhythmic, while simultaneously monitoring both babies' vital signs on multiple screens. And the little elephant learned that being different wasn't something to hide, she read, her finger tracing the pages of a worn picture book. It was something that made the whole jungle more beautiful. His son stirred in his incubator, tiny fingers opening and closing as if reaching for the sound of her voice. His daughter's heart rate had stabilized to the most consistent pattern Karim had seen since their birth. "They respond to stories," Amara said without looking up, somehow sensing his presence. "Premature babies often find comfort in rhythmic sounds. It reminds them of being in the womb." Karim stepped into the room, noticing details he'd missed before. The children's book was one of several stacked on a small table, all purchased, he now realized, with Amara's own limited resources. There were also fresh flowers in a simple glass jar and soft music playing from a small speaker that definitely wasn't hospital equipment. "Dr. Okonkwo," he said quietly. The book slipped from Amara's hands, landing on the floor with a soft thud. She turned in her chair, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally, resignation. "You know," she said. It wasn't a question. "I know everything. Your father, the twins, what happened that night." Karim moved closer, but carefully, as if approaching a wounded animal. "I know who you really are." Amara's shoulders sagged, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked truly defeated. "Then you understand why I shouldn't be here." "Actually, I understand the opposite." Karim pulled up a chair, positioning himself so they were at eye level. "I understand why you're exactly who should be here." She shook her head, tears beginning to well in her eyes. "Mr. Al-Mansouri, I failed. Kemi and Tayo died because I couldn't protect them. I had all the training, all the knowledge, and I let them be taken. I let them die. You were overpowered by armed men who threatened your life." Karim said firmly. "That's not medical failure. That's criminal violence. I should have done more. I should have—" "What? Gotten yourself killed? Then those babies would have died anyway, and so would you." Karim leaned forward. "Amara, what happened to those children wasn't your fault. But what's happening to my children, their survival, their progress, that is entirely because of you." Amara wiped her eyes, but fresh tears replaced the ones she'd brushed away. "You don't understand. I made decisions that night based on emotion, not medical judgment. I compromised my objectivity. I cared too much. You loved them. That's the problem. Doctors aren't supposed to love their patients. We're supposed to maintain professional distance, make rational decisions. I crossed that line, and when the crisis came, I was paralyzed by fear instead of acting with medical precision." Karim thought about the past few days, watching Amara work with his children. "Is that what you think happened with my twins? That you've been making emotional decisions instead of medical ones?" Amara hesitated, glancing at the monitors. "No. With your children, I've been completely professional. Have you? Because from where I'm sitting, I've watched you spend your own money on their care. I've seen you work 18-hour shifts without pay. I've watched you read to them, sing to them, treat them like they're precious instead of just patients." Karim paused. "If that's not love, what is it?" Amara was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the babies. "It's different this time." "How?" "Because they're going to live." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Your children are strong. They're fighting. They're going to make it. Because of you. Because someone who loves them is fighting for them." The monitors continued their steady beeping, filling the silence between them. Finally, Amara spoke again, her voice stronger, but still fragile. "After Kemi and Tayo died, I couldn't sleep for months. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, heard their monitors flatlining. The hospital offered me counseling, medication, time off, but nothing helped because the truth was simple. I had failed in the most fundamental way possible." She stood and walked to his daughter's incubator, placing her hand gently on the clear plastic surface. "When I saw your children that first night, during the storm, I thought maybe this was my chance to prove I could still save lives. But the more time I spend with them, the more I realize I'm not trying to save them. I'm trying to save myself." "Maybe that's exactly what they need," Karim said. "Someone fighting for their own redemption as much as their lives." Amara turned to face him. "Your brother investigated me, didn't he? That's how you found out?" "Yes." "What else did he discover?" Karim hesitated. He knew about her financial situation, her poverty, the fact that she'd been using her own resources for his children's. But something told him this wasn't the right moment for those revelations. "He found out that you're probably the most qualified person in this hospital to care for premature twins," he said instead, "and that you've been hiding that qualification because you're afraid of failing again." "I'm not afraid of failing," Amara said quietly. "I'm terrified of succeeding." The admission hung in the air between them. Karim waited for her to explain. "If I succeed with your children, if they survive and thrive, then I have to face the possibility that I could have saved Kemi and Tayo too, that maybe I gave up too easily, that maybe I've wasted the last year and a half running from something I should have been fighting for. Or," Karim said gently, "you have to face the possibility that you're exactly as skilled and compassionate as you always were, and that what happened to those twins wasn't your fault." At that moment, his son stirred in his incubator, making the small mewing sounds that premature babies make when they're starting to wake up. Without thinking, Amara moved to his side, her hands automatically checking his position, adjusting his blanket, speaking to him in soft, reassuring tones. "Hello, little fighter," she murmured. "You're safe. Everything's okay." Karim watched her work, seeing not the broken woman who'd been hiding from her past, but the skilled physician she'd always been. Her movements were confident, intuitive, filled with exactly the kind of love she'd convinced herself was unprofessional. "Amara," he said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think before you answer." She looked up from the baby, her hand still gentle on the incubator. "If you could go back to that night with Kemi and Tayo, knowing everything you know now, would you do anything differently?" She was quiet for a long time, considering the question. "I would have called security earlier. I would have had backup, protocols in place. I would have—" She stopped. "No. Actually, I wouldn't change anything about the medical care I provided. My treatment decisions were correct. The protocols I followed were appropriate. Then what would you change? I would have forgiven myself sooner for not being able to fight off 3 armed men." Her voice was stronger now, more certain. "I would have realized that loving my patients wasn't a weakness. It was why I became a doctor in the first place." Karim smiled. "And if someone asked you right now whether you're qualified to make life-and-death medical decisions?" Amara looked at his children, stronger now than they'd been 3 days ago, their color better, their breathing more stable. She looked at the charts she'd been meticulously keeping, the careful adjustments she'd made to their care, the countless small decisions that had kept them alive and thriving. "I would say," she began slowly, "that I'm not just qualified, I'm called to it." Just then, Dr. Okafor appeared in the doorway, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "Amara, I need to speak with you," he said. "There are some irregularities in the staffing records, questions about your credentials and authorization to provide the level of care you've been giving these patients." Karim stood, understanding that this was the moment of truth. Amara could continue hiding, continue pretending to be someone lesser than she was, or she could step back into her true identity. "Dr. Okafor," Karim said, "I'd like you to meet Dr. Amara Okonkwo, one of Nigeria's youngest board-certified neonatologists, and the person who's going to be overseeing my children's care going forward." Amara looked at him with surprise, then at Dr. Okafor, then at the babies who had become her path back to herself. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong for the first time since Karim had met her. "That's exactly who I am." The silence in the makeshift NICU stretched like a held breath. Dr. Okafor stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes moving between Amara, Karim, and the advanced medical charts scattered around her workstation. The recognition dawning on his face was almost comical, like a man realizing he'd been working alongside a master while treating her as an apprentice. "Dr. Amara Okonkwo," he repeated slowly, the full weight of the name settling in. "The Emmanuel Okonkwo's daughter, the neonatologist who—" He paused, clearly searching his memory. "You disappeared after the Okoli twins incident." "I didn't disappear," Amara said, her voice steadier than it had been in months. "I just forgot who I was for a while." Dr. Okafor stepped fully into the room, his demeanor shifting from authority figure to colleague, even perhaps to someone seeking guidance. "The care protocols you've established here, the modifications to the ventilator settings, the medication adjustments, I thought they were intuitive nursing interventions, but they're actually advanced neonatal medicine." "They are," Amara confirmed, moving to check the monitors with renewed confidence. "These babies needed specialized care that went beyond standard nursing protocols." "You've been practicing medicine without proper authorization," Dr. Okafor said, but there was no accusation. In his voice, only wonder. "You could have been dismissed, prosecuted even." "I know." Amara's hands moved over the controls with practiced precision. "But they needed me to be a doctor, not a nurse, so I chose to be what they needed." Karim watched this exchange with growing amazement. In the space of a single conversation, he was witnessing Amara's transformation from a woman hiding from her past to a physician reclaiming her calling. But what struck him most was how natural the change seemed, as if she was simply returning to her true self rather than becoming someone new. "Dr. Okafor," Karim interjected, "what would be required for Dr. Okonkwo to practice medicine officially in this hospital?" Dr. Okafor looked thoughtful. Her credentials would need to be verified, which shouldn't be difficult given her reputation. She'd need to go through administrative processing, meet with the medical director, possibly undergo a competency review, all of which could take weeks, Amara said quietly. "And in the meantime, your children need continuity of care." "Actually," Dr. Okafor said, a small smile playing at his lips, "there might be another option. We have a locum tenens program for visiting specialists. If Mr. Al-Mansouri were to request a private consultation and specifically request you by name, I could process the paperwork as an emergency appointment." Karim didn't hesitate. "Consider it requested." But as the administrative wheels began to turn, Amara found herself facing a different kind of challenge. Word of her true identity was spreading through the hospital with the speed that only institutional gossip could achieve. By afternoon, she was fielding questions from colleagues who suddenly remembered cases they'd wanted her opinion on. Medical students who'd heard legendary stories about her innovative techniques, and senior staff who were suddenly viewing her previous suggestions in an entirely new light. Dr. Okonkwo, a young resident, approached nervously as Amara was updating the twins' charts. "I'm sorry to bother you, but we have a 30-week preemie in the main NICU who isn't responding to conventional treatment. Dr. Adebayo wondered if you might take a look." It was the moment Amara had been dreading and longing for in equal measure. Another premature baby, another life hanging in the balance, another chance to succeed or to fail. She began, then caught sight of Karim's twins, both sleeping peacefully under her care. "Yes, let me see the file." What followed was Amara's first official medical consultation in over a year. The baby in question, a little girl named Hope, had been struggling with respiratory distress that wasn't responding to standard ventilator support. As Amara reviewed the charts, her medical mind engaged fully for the first time since the Okoli twins' tragedy. "Her CO2 levels are elevated, but her oxygen saturation is adequate," she murmured, studying the data. "You've tried conventional mechanical ventilation, but have you considered high-frequency oscillatory ventilation?" The attending physician, Dr. Adebayo, looked skeptical. "We don't typically use HFOV for babies this size unless conventional ventilation isn't working," Amara finished. "Which it isn't. This baby's lung compliance suggests she needs gentler, more frequent pressure variations rather than deeper breaths." She moved to the baby's bedside, her hands gentle but confident as she performed examination. The little girl was smaller than Karim's twins had been, her breathing labored despite the ventilator support. "Hello, Hope," Amara whispered, her voice taking on the same tender tone she used with all her patients. "Let's see if we can make breathing a little easier for you." The transition to high-frequency oscillatory ventilation was delicate, requiring precise calculations and constant monitoring. But within 2 hours, Hope's CO2 levels had normalized and her breathing became visibly less labored. "Remarkable," Dr. Adebayo said, studying the improved readings. "I haven't seen a response that dramatic in years," but Amara barely heard the praise. She was watching Hope's tiny chest rise and fall with new ease, remembering what it felt like to heal rather than helplessly witness suffering. The familiar surge of professional satisfaction mixed with deep personal fulfillment was overwhelming. "Dr. Okonkwo," Dr. Adebayo continued, "would you consider consulting on some of our other difficult cases? We have several babies who might benefit from your expertise." Before Amara could answer, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Karim standing behind her, his expression unreadable. "Could I speak with you privately?" he asked. They stepped into a quiet corridor away from the bustle of the NICU. Karim was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "How did that feel?" he asked finally. "Terrifying," Amara admitted. "And wonderful. And necessary." She paused. "Right. You saved that baby's life." "I adjusted her ventilator settings. The baby saved her own life." Karim smiled, spoken like someone who understands that medicine is partnership, not dominance. But even as they spoke, Amara's phone buzzed with a text message that made her face go pale. She read it twice, her hands beginning to shake. "What is it?" Karim asked. "It's from my brother, David. He's at Oxford, studying medicine." She showed him the message. "Heard you're back to practicing. Dad would be proud, but you should know. Chukwu. Okoli was released from prison last week. Thought you should be aware." The name hit Amara like a physical blow. Chukwu Okoli, the father of Kemi and Tayo, the man whose desperation had led to that terrible night 18 months ago. "He was in prison?" Karim asked. "For fraud, not for what happened to his children. That case was never prosecuted." Amara's voice was barely steady. If he's out, if he knows I'm practicing again, what are you afraid he'll do? I don't know. Blame me for what happened. Demand answers I don't have, or worse. Try to make me pay for his children's deaths in ways the legal system never did. Karim could see the fear returning to her eyes, threatening to undo all the progress she'd made in reclaiming her identity. Amara, you can't live your life afraid of shadows from the past. These aren't shadows, she said urgently. Chukwu Okoli lost everything, his children, his freedom, his reputation. People in that state of desperation don't always think rationally. That evening, as Amara sat with Karim's twins during the quiet night shift, she found herself constantly glancing at the door, jumping at every sound in the hallway. The confidence she'd felt during Hope's successful treatment was overshadowed by the knowledge that her past was catching up with her. She was checking the twins' overnight medications when a figure appeared in the doorway. At first, she thought it was just another hospital staff member, but as her eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, she recognized the man from newspaper photos that had haunted her dreams. Chukwu Okoli stood in the doorway, older and thinner than she remembered, his clothes worn but clean. His eyes were fixed not on her, but on the incubators containing Karim's children. "Dr. Okonkwo," he said quietly, "I heard you were here." Amara's hand instinctively moved toward the emergency call button, but something in his tone made her pause. There was no anger in his voice, only exhaustion and something that might have been grief. "Mr. Okoli," she managed to say, "how did hospital security isn't very tight at night," he said, still looking at the babies. "I needed to see you, to see if you were really taking care of children again." The silence stretched between them, filled with the soft beeping of monitors and the gentle whoosh of ventilators. Finally, Chukwu stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. "They look healthy," he said, nodding toward the twins. "Strong." "They are," Amara replied carefully. "They're going to be fine." Chukwu was quiet for a long moment, his eyes filling with tears he seemed to have been holding back for months. "My children could have been fine too," he said finally. "If I had been stronger, if I had made different choices, if I hadn't been so proud, so desperate, so stupid." Amara felt her own tears beginning. "Mr. Okoli, I came here to blame you," he interrupted. "To tell you that my children died because you failed them. But standing here, watching you care for these babies—" He shook his head. "You didn't fail Kemi and Tayo. I did." The admission hung in the air like a prayer, raw and honest and devastating. Amara realized she was holding her breath, afraid that speaking would break whatever spell was allowing this moment of truth to exist. "I let dangerous men into our lives," Chukwu continued. "I borrowed money I couldn't repay. I made choices that put my children at risk, and when the consequences came, instead of protecting them, I let fear control me. You tried to save them. You fought for them. I'm the one who walked away." He turned to look at her directly for the first time since entering the room. "I spent 6 months in prison thinking about that night, Dr. Okonkwo. Every day I wished I could go back and make different choices, but I can't. All I can do is tell you the truth. You are not responsible for my children's deaths. I am." The words Amara had needed to hear for 18 months finally filled the space around her, spoken by the one person whose forgiveness she'd never dared to seek. But even as relief flooded through her, she realized that the journey toward healing was just beginning. The days following Chukwu Okoli's unexpected visit marked a turning point that rippled through every aspect of Amara's life. For the first time in 18 months, she slept through the night without nightmares. When she looked in the mirror each morning, she saw Dr. Amara Okonkwo looking back, not the broken woman who had been hiding behind a false identity, but the physician her father had raised her to become. But transformation, Amara was learning, was rarely a solitary journey. As word of her true identity and exceptional skills spread throughout Lagos General and beyond, she found herself at the center of a whirlwind that would challenge everything she thought she wanted from her new life. The first surprise came from an unexpected source. Dr. Margaret Adebayo, the hospital's chief of pediatrics, summoned Amara to her office on a Thursday morning with a proposal that left her speechless. The Lagos State Ministry of Health has been looking for someone to lead a new neonatal intensive care program, Dr. Adebayo began, sliding a thick folder across her desk. Federal funding, state-of-the-art equipment, the opportunity to build something revolutionary from the ground up. Amara stared at the proposal documents, her heart racing. They want me to head the program? They want Dr. Amara Okonkwo, the neonatologist, who's been performing miracles in our makeshift NICU with equipment held together by prayer and determination. Dr. Adebayo smiled. Word travels fast in medical circles, Amara. Your work with the Al-Mansouri twins, your consultation on Hope's case, the 3 other successful interventions you've made this week, people are talking. The opportunity was everything Amara had once dreamed of, the chance to build a world-class neonatal program, unlimited resources, the authority to implement the innovative care protocols she'd been developing. It was also terrifying. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course. But Amara, Dr. Adebayo's expression grew serious. Don't let fear make this decision for you. You've already proven you can save lives under impossible circumstances. Imagine what you could do with proper support. That afternoon, Amara found herself in an unusual position, explaining a career opportunity to the family of her patients. Karim and Yasmin had become more than employers. They'd become the catalyst for her personal transformation. She owed them honesty about this new development. It sounds like an incredible opportunity, Yasmin said, cradling their son, who had grown strong enough for extended periods outside his incubator. But what would it mean for your current patients? The new program wouldn't start for 3 months, Amara explained. Your twins would be well past the critical care stage by then. They'd be ready for regular pediatric follow-up. Karim studied her carefully. But that's not what you're really asking us, is it? Amara looked down at her hands. I've spent so long running from responsibility, from the possibility of failure, that I'm not sure I trust myself to make this decision rationally. What does your heart tell you? Yasmin asked gently. That this is what I've always wanted to do, build something that could prevent other families from going through what the Okolis experienced, what you experienced during the storm. Amara paused. But my heart also told me to trust those men 18 months ago, and look how that ended. Karim set down the medical journal he'd been reading, one of several he'd started studying to better understand his children's care. Amara, can I tell you something about business that might apply to medicine? She nodded. The biggest mistake entrepreneurs make isn't taking bad risks. It's avoiding good risks because they're afraid of repeating past failures. He leaned forward. Your heart didn't fail you 18 months ago. Your judgment didn't fail you. A criminal act was committed against you and your patients. That's not a reason to distrust your instincts. It's a reason to build better safeguards. That evening, Amara made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of accepting or declining the position, she asked for a meeting with the Ministry of Health officials to propose modifications to their program. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room at the ministry building, with 5 officials, who clearly expected a straightforward acceptance of their generous offer. Instead, they found themselves listening to a detailed presentation about trauma-informed neonatal care, security protocols for vulnerable patients, and family support systems that went far beyond traditional medical treatment. Dr. Okonkwo, the lead official, interrupted after 20 minutes. While these additions are admirable, they would significantly increase the program's budget and complexity. They would also significantly increase its effectiveness, Amara replied calmly. Premature babies don't exist in isolation. They're part of family systems, often under extreme stress. If we treat only the medical condition without addressing the broader circumstances that put these children at risk, we're providing incomplete care. She clicked to the next slide of her presentation, showing statistics about premature births in low-income families, rates of NICU readmission, and long-term developmental outcomes. Every family like the Okolis, desperate, under-financial, pressure, vulnerable to exploitation, represents a potential crisis waiting to happen. We can build the most technologically advanced NICU in West Africa, but if we don't address the social factors that create medical emergencies, we'll be treating symptoms instead of causes. The room was quiet as the officials absorbed her proposal. Finally, the lead official spoke again. What you're describing isn't just a medical program, it's a social intervention program that happens to be based in a hospital. Exactly, Amara said, and that's why it might actually work. 3 weeks later, the ministry approved her modified proposal, but the real validation came from an unexpected source. Dr. Emmanuel Okonkwo's former colleagues, Dr. Patricia Akindele, who had worked with Amara's father for over a decade, visited her at Lagos General on a Tuesday afternoon. She brought with her a file that made Amara's hands shake when she opened it. "Your father was working on this before he died," Dr. Akindele explained, "a comprehensive neonatal care program that integrated medical treatment with family support services. He called it holistic newborn intervention." The file contained detailed plans, research proposals, and funding applications that looked remarkably similar to what Amara had presented to the ministry. But more than that, it contained a handwritten note in her father's familiar script, "For Amara, who will understand that saving babies means saving families." "He knew," Amara whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He knew this was what I would need to do." "He also knew you would need to find your own way to it," Dr. Akindele said gently. "He used to say that the best doctors weren't the ones who never failed, but the ones who learned from failure and used it to serve their patients better." That night, Amara sat in the hospital chapel, a small, quiet space that served multiple faiths and denominations. She'd never been particularly religious, but something about the silence and the soft lighting helped her think clearly. She thought about Kemi and Tayo, whose deaths had taught her that medicine without security was incomplete. She thought about Karim's twins, whose survival had taught her that love and professionalism weren't mutually exclusive. She thought about baby Hope and the dozen other successful cases she'd handled in recent weeks, each one rebuilding her confidence and reaffirming her calling. Most importantly, she thought about her father, who had apparently seen this path long before she had. When she finally left the chapel, Amara knew exactly what she needed to do. But first, she had one more conversation to have. She found Karim in the family lounge, working on his laptop while his wife napped nearby. Their twins were doing so well that they now spent only part of each day in the intensive monitoring setup, sleeping peacefully in regular bassinets. "I've made my decision about the ministry position," she said quietly. Karim looked up, his expression expectant. "I'm going to accept it, with one condition." Amara sat down across from him. "I want to establish a partnership between the new program and your foundation." Karim blinked, clearly surprised. "My foundation? The Al-Mansouri Children's Foundation? The one you're going to start to honor what your family has learned about the intersection of privilege and vulnerability?" Amara smiled at his confused expression. "You think I haven't noticed you've been reading medical journals, studying pediatric development, asking questions about healthcare access in Nigeria. You think I don't see the plans forming in your business mind?" Karim laughed, a sound of genuine delight. "You know me better than I thought. I know you're someone who understands that real change requires both medical expertise and financial resources. Your children survived because they had both exceptional medical care and the economic means to access it. But for every success story like theirs, there are dozens of tragedies like Kemi and Tayo. What are you proposing? A comprehensive program. Your foundation provides financial support, security systems, and family services. My medical program provides the clinical care. Together, we create something that addresses both the medical and social factors that put premature babies at risk." Karim closed his laptop, giving her his full attention. "You've thought this through." "I've lived through what happens when we don't think it through," Amara replied. "This time I want to build something that can prevent other families from experiencing what the Okolis went through, what you nearly went through." They talked until dawn, sketching out a vision that combined Karim's business acumen with Amara's medical expertise. By the time the sun rose over Lagos, they had outlined a program that would transform neonatal care not just in Nigeria, but potentially across West Africa. 3 months later, Dr. Amara Okonkwo stood in the gleaming new Lagos Advanced Neonatal Care Center, watching as the first patients were admitted to a facility that represented everything she'd learned about healing. Not just babies, but families, communities, and her own wounded heart. In the center's main NICU, 2 cribs bore small plaques with the names Kemi and Tayo, not as memorials to failure, but as promises that their brief lives had meaning, that their deaths had taught lessons that would save other children. And in the Family Support Center, funded by the Al-Mansouri Foundation, desperate parents found not just financial assistance, but counseling, security, and hope. Everything that might have saved 2 small lives 18 months earlier. Amara had learned that transformation wasn't about becoming someone new. It was about becoming more fully who you were always meant to be. And who she was meant to be, she now understood, was someone who saved babies by saving everything around them that put them at risk. 6 months after the storm that had brought them together, Amara stood before an auditorium filled with medical professionals from across West Africa. The annual Nigerian Pediatric Conference had never seen attendance like this. Over 800 doctors, nurses, and healthcare administrators had traveled to Lagos to hear about the revolutionary integrated care model that was already saving lives and transforming communities. But the presentation wasn't what Amara had expected to be giving when she first accepted the ministry position. What had started as a medical program had evolved into something unprecedented. A blueprint for addressing the root causes of neonatal mortality that other countries were already studying and adapting. Traditional neonatal intensive care focuses on the baby, Amara explained to the rapt audience, her voice steady and confident. Our integrated model focuses on the entire ecosystem that supports or threatens that baby's survival. She clicked to the next slide, showing statistics that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. In our first 180 days of operation, we've treated 127 premature babies. Our survival rate is 94% compared to the national average of 67%. But more significantly, our family retention rate, the percentage of families who complete recommended follow-up care, is 96%. A hand shot up from the audience. Dr. Okonkwo, how do you account for such dramatic improvements in family compliance? Amara smiled, thinking of the innovations that had emerged from necessity and heartbreak. When families aren't struggling to pay for basic care, when they have secure transportation to appointments, when they have psychological support for the trauma of premature birth, when they feel heard and valued rather than judged and dismissed, they participate in their children's recovery. What she didn't tell the audience was how many of those innovations had come from Karim's unique perspective as both a business strategist and a father who had nearly lost everything. His foundation had funded not just medical equipment, but mobile clinics that brought follow-up care to families who couldn't afford transportation. They'd created a microloan program that helped families avoid the kind of desperate financial decisions that had destroyed the Okoli family. Most importantly, they'd hired social workers who were trained to identify families at risk and intervene before crisis struck. After her presentation, Amara was approached by Dr. Sarah Mensah, a neonatologist from Ghana who had been taking detailed notes throughout the talk. Dr. Okonkwo, I'm impressed by your outcomes, but I have to ask, how do you sustain this financially? The comprehensive support you're describing must be incredibly expensive. It is, Amara admitted, but we've found that prevention is always cheaper than crisis intervention. When we support families proactively, we prevent readmissions, reduce emergency interventions, and dramatically decrease the long-term complications that require years of expensive care. Dr. Mensah nodded thoughtfully. And the private foundation funding, that's sustainable long-term? It was a question Amara had been grappling with herself. The Al-Mansouri Foundation had been generous beyond measure, but she knew that real systemic change couldn't depend on individual philanthropy alone. We're working on that, she said diplomatically. We've documented our cost savings and improved outcomes, and we're presenting that data to health ministers across the region. The goal is to prove that this model of care is not just morally superior, but economically advantageous. What she didn't mention was the meeting scheduled for the following week with representatives from the World Health Organization, who had expressed interest in piloting similar programs in other developing nations, or the fact that 3 other countries had already requested consultation on adapting the Lagos model. That evening, Amara found herself at a dinner that would have been unimaginable 18 months earlier. She sat at a table with Karim and Yasmin, their twins, now healthy 6-month-olds, sleeping peacefully in strollers beside them, surrounded by some of the most influential health policymakers in Africa. Dr. Okonkwo, said Dr. Kwame Asante, Ghana's Minister of Health, I've been reviewing your program data. What would it take to implement a similar model in Accra? Before Amara could answer, Yasmin spoke up. What it took in Lagos was someone willing to admit that traditional approaches weren't working and be brave enough to try something different. Karim smiled at his wife's directness, and someone willing to invest in solutions rather than just lamenting problems. The conversation that followed revealed something Amara was still learning to process. Her story had become larger than her, personal healing. The program she'd built from her trauma and Karim's resources had captured international attention, not just for its medical outcomes, but for its approach to addressing social determinants of health. The beautiful thing about your model, Dr. Asante continued, is that it doesn't require new technology or expensive equipment. It requires new thinking about what healthcare should encompass. After dinner, as they walked through the hotel lobby, Yasmin pulled Amara aside. Can I share something with you? Yasmin asked. Watching you with our children taught me something about motherhood that I never expected. Amara waited, curious. I thought being a good mother meant providing the best of everything, the finest hospitals, the most expensive treatments, the most exclusive care. But you showed me that being a good mother means ensuring your children are cared for by people who see them as whole human beings, not just medical cases. Your children were never just medical cases to me, Amara said softly. No, and that's what made all the difference. Yasmin paused. That's what you've built at the center. A place where babies are treated as whole human beings from families who deserve dignity and support. The next morning brought news that would test everything they'd built. Amara received an urgent call from Dr. Okafor at 5 a.m. There had been an incident at the center, not a medical emergency, but something potentially more threatening to their mission. A group of men showed up at the family support center last night, Dr. Okafor explained, when Amara arrived at the hospital. They were demanding to see financial records, asking questions about funding sources, claiming someone had filed a complaint about misuse of government resources. Amara felt the familiar cold grip of fear, memories of another night when dangerous men had invaded her medical space. But this time was different. This time she wasn't alone. "Who were they?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "We're not sure. They had identification claiming to be from the Ministry of Health, but when we called to verify, no one knew anything about an investigation." Within hours, the truth emerged through Karim's business contacts. A competitor, a private hospital, that had lost significant business to the new integrated care model, had hired investigators to look for irregularities in the program's funding and operations. When they found nothing, they'd resorted to intimidation tactics designed to disrupt operations and undermine public confidence. "They're trying to shut us down through fear," Karim explained to the emergency meeting of stakeholders they'd called. "The same way they probably shut down other innovations that threatened their market share." But the response to the intimidation attempt revealed how deeply the program had rooted itself in the community. By evening, over 50 families who had been served by the center had gathered outside the facility in a spontaneous show of support. Local media covered the story, highlighting not the allegations, but the dramatic improvements in neonatal care that the program had achieved. Most powerfully, Chukwu Okoli appeared on the evening news, speaking publicly for the first time since his release from prison. "Dr. Okonkwo and the team at this center are doing what should have been available when my children needed help," he said, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of his words. "They're preventing other families from experiencing the tragedy that destroyed mine. Anyone trying to shut down this program is putting children's lives at risk for profit." The attempted sabotage backfired spectacularly. Within a week, the Ministry of Health had launched a formal investigation, not into the center's operations, but into the harassment tactics used against it. More importantly, the publicity brought additional attention to the program's success, resulting in inquiries from international health organizations and offers of support from unexpected sources. "It's strange," Amara confided to Karim as they watched the twins play in the center's family room, now equipped with toys and comfortable seating that made medical visits feel less clinical. 18 months ago, I was terrified of being noticed, of having my work scrutinized. Now I realized that hiding from attention was another way of running from responsibility." "What changed?" Karim asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "I stopped trying to protect myself and started trying to protect others." Amara picked up his daughter, who had crawled over to tug on her white coat. "When your motivation is external, when it's about serving something larger than your own fear, it becomes easier to be brave." The attempted intimidation had revealed something else. The program they'd built was no longer dependent on any single person or funding source. It had become a model, a movement, a proof of concept that was already spreading beyond Lagos. That night, as Amara reviewed applications from medical professionals wanting to train in the integrated care model, she realized that her journey from broken healer to innovative leader had created ripples that were reaching shores she'd never imagined. The little girl who had once been too afraid to sleep without nightmares was now training others to build programs that would prevent other children from experiencing preventable tragedies. The woman who had once hidden her identity was now internationally recognized as a pioneer in holistic neonatal care. But the most profound change wasn't in her professional status or public recognition. It was in the quiet moments, like now, when she could look at Karim's thriving children and feel only gratitude for the storm that had brought them together, for the crisis that had forced her to reclaim her calling, and for the partnership that had transformed both of their lives into something larger than they could have achieved alone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new families in crisis, new opportunities to prove that comprehensive care worked better than crisis intervention. But tonight, as she locked up the center and headed home to her own apartment, no longer the cramped room in Mushin, but a modest place near the hospital where she could rest and recharge, Amara felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The deep satisfaction of work that aligned perfectly with purpose. 1 year after the storm that changed everything, Lagos was experiencing a different kind of weather phenomenon. This time, instead of destructive winds and flooding, the city was being transformed by something more powerful. Hope spreading through its healthcare system like morning light breaking through clouds. Dr. Amara Okonkwo stood at the window of her office in the Lagos Advanced Neonatal Care Center, watching as construction crews put the finishing touches on the second building of what was now being called the Karim Al-Mansouri Medical Campus. The expansion had become necessary not because of administrative planning, but because of overwhelming demand from families across West Africa seeking the kind of comprehensive care that had once existed only in their dreams. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see Karim entering with a folder that had become familiar over the past months. Another proposal, another opportunity, another chance to expand what they'd built. The World Health Organization wants to send a delegation next month, he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. They're interested in creating a certification program for integrated neonatal care centers based on our model. Amara smiled, but there was something bittersweet in her expression. 5 centers in Nigeria, 3 in Ghana, 2 in Kenya, and now they want to make it a global standard. Remember when I was afraid to treat 2 babies without hiding my credentials? I remember when you saved 2 babies despite having every reason to run away, Karim corrected. Everything that's happened since then has been the natural result of that choice. What had started as an emergency during a storm had evolved into something neither of them could have predicted. The center now employed over 200 staff members, from neonatologists to social workers to financial counselors. The Al-Mansouri Foundation had expanded beyond healthcare into education, providing scholarships for medical students who committed to working in underserved communities. Most significantly, their model had achieved something unprecedented, a 97% family satisfaction rate alongside medical outcomes that exceeded even the most advanced hospitals in Europe and North America. There's something else, Karim continued, his tone shifting to something more personal. Yasmin and I have been talking, and we've made a decision about our family. Amara looked up, curious. The twins were now walking, babbling, and bringing endless joy to everyone who met them. She couldn't imagine what decision needed to be made. We want to adopt, Karim said simply. Not infants, older children who need homes, children whose families are struggling with the same kind of desperation that nearly destroyed the Okolis. The words hit Amara with unexpected emotion. She thought of all the families they'd served, the children they'd saved, the parents who'd been given hope when they'd had none. But she also thought of the children they couldn't save, not medically but socially, the ones whose families couldn't be stabilized, whose circumstances remained too dangerous or chaotic for healthy development. "How many children?" she asked. "As many as we can properly care for," Yasmin's voice came from the doorway. She entered carrying their son, who immediately reached toward Amara with the familiarity of a child who had spent countless hours in this office. "We've been approved for 3 initially, but we hope to expand the program." The program? Karim smiled. The Al-Mansouri Foundation is launching a comprehensive adoption and foster care initiative. Professional support, financial assistance, educational resources, everything needed to help families who want to provide homes for children who need them. As they spoke, Amara realized she was witnessing the completion of a circle that had begun in tragedy and was ending in multiplication of hope. Kemi and Tayo's deaths had taught her that medical care without social support was incomplete. Karim's twins had taught her that love and professional excellence could coexist. Now the program they'd built together was creating opportunities for children who might otherwise grow up without families. Speaking of families, Yasmin said with a smile that suggested she was changing the subject to something equally important. "We have news about yours as well." She handed Amara an envelope bearing official seals. Inside was a letter from the Lagos state government, but the content made Amara's breath catch. "The Emmanuel Okonkwo Memorial Children's Hospital will be officially dedicated next month," Yasmin explained. "Your father's original hospital is being rebuilt as a public facility, funded by the state and managed by your foundation. You're being named as Chief Medical Director." Amara stared at the letter, remembering the private hospital where she'd first learned to care for premature babies, where her father had taught her that medicine was as much about compassion as competence. The facility had been sold after his death, converted to a commercial medical center that served only families who could afford premium care. "How did this happen?" she whispered. "When the state saw the success of our integrated model, they realized they needed to provide similar care in multiple locations," Karim explained. "But they also realized they needed someone who understood both the medical and social aspects of comprehensive care. There was only one candidate." The dedication ceremony took place on a Saturday morning that felt charged with significance. Hundreds of people gathered: medical professionals, government officials, families who had been served by the center, and children who were alive because of the care they'd received. But the moment that would stay with Amara forever came when Chukwu Okoli approached the podium to speak. He had become an advocate for families in crisis, working with the foundation to identify and support parents facing the kind of desperation that had once consumed his life. 18 months ago, I lost my children because I was too proud to ask for help and too desperate to make good decisions," he said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "But their deaths were not meaningless if they taught us to build something that prevents other families from facing the same tragedy." He gestured toward the gleaming new hospital. "This building represents more than medical care. It represents the understanding that children cannot be separated from their families, that families cannot be separated from their communities, and that healing requires addressing not just illness, but the conditions that create vulnerability." As he spoke, Amara noticed something that made her heart full. In the front row sat dozens of children, premature babies who had grown into healthy toddlers, older children who had been adopted into loving families, teenagers whose families had been stabilized through comprehensive support. Each child represented a life that might have been lost to preventable tragedy. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed and the sun set over Lagos, Amara found herself standing in the hospital's neonatal intensive care unit. The equipment was state-of-the-art, the staff was expertly trained, and the family support services were integrated seamlessly with medical care. But what struck her most was how normal it all seemed, as if this level of comprehensive care should be the standard, rather than the exception. "Proud?" Karim asked, joining her at the viewing window where she was watching the evening shift change. "Grateful," she replied. "And hopeful. For all the children who will never know how close they came to being casualties of a system that treated symptoms instead of causes." Amara paused, watching a nurse, one of the dozens they'd trained in trauma-informed care, gently adjust a tiny patient's position. "They'll grow up thinking this level of care is normal, They'll expect it, demand it, create it wherever they go. As they prepared to leave, Amara's phone buzzed with a text message that made her smile. It was from Dr. Sarah Mensah in Ghana, sharing a photo of their newest graduate from the Integrated Care Training Program alongside the message, "Baby number 50, discharged home healthy today. The ripples keep spreading." That night, Amara returned to her apartment, no longer the modest place near the hospital, but a comfortable home in a quiet neighborhood where she'd finally learned to rest without guilt. On her bedside table sat two framed photographs, one of Kemi and Tayo and one of Karim's twins on their first birthday, healthy and laughing. Between them was a handwritten note from her father that she'd found among his papers. The best doctors are wounded healers, people who transform their own pain into medicine for others. She'd spent months thinking that her trauma disqualified her from medicine. Now she understood that her trauma had prepared her for a kind of medicine that went beyond treating individual patients to healing entire systems. As she prepared for sleep, Amara reflected on the journey from that stormy night when she'd promised two premature babies that she wouldn't let them die. She'd kept that promise. But in the process, she discovered something more profound, that saving lives wasn't just about medical intervention. It was about creating conditions where life could flourish, not just for patients, but for families, communities, and the healers themselves. The storm that had brought them together had ended within days. But the transformation it had triggered, the lives saved, the families strengthened, the systems changed, the hope multiplied, would continue spreading far beyond anything they could have imagined. In the end, the poor African nurse had indeed saved the Arab executive's premature twins. But in the process, she had saved herself, transformed him, and created a legacy that would save countless others for generations to come. Sometimes the most powerful healers are those who have learned to transform their deepest wounds into medicine for the world. And sometimes the greatest storms, the ones that threaten to destroy everything, are actually the forces that clear the way for something better to grow. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.